Happy Tuesday, Move Student Ministries. This is Pastor Justin, and I'm here to bring you a devotional for the week. I've kind of got something new in the pipeline. I started working through this devotional book on my own, and it has some stuff that I wanted to start incorporating with you guys, and it's a good time for us to do some material together. You don't need to read the book. I'm going to be doing everything in the devotional that you need to do, but if you're curious, it's called Emotionally Healthy Spirituality. It's more for adults. It's more for older people who've been Christians for a while and they're trying to process things, but I'm going to try to condense it and make it into a way that's really easy for you to work with and really easy for you to use in our own devotional time. But basically the idea behind this devotional is that you and I have problems in our walk with God, and we need to figure out what those problems are and figure out what we need to change to make it so we have a healthy walk with God, to kind of make things right. And there's 6 patterns, and there's maybe patterns or maybe like symptoms that you and I have some unhealthiness in our life, in our walk with God, and it's to help us iron out those problems so that we can start to live the life that God has for us in the fullness of it. That way we don't miss anything. And so I'm going to list these 6 things, these 6 problems that you probably have at least one of in your relationship with God, in your walk as a Christian. So as I list these 6 things, I want you to kind of imagine, which one am I? Which one of these 6 things do I have? Pick one. Now you maybe identify like, wow, I have that problem. Just pick one that seems to be the biggest, and then we'll focus on that one together. So the first one is using God to run away from God. Now you maybe say, Pastor Justin, that makes no sense. A person who is using God to run away from God will find themselves praying for God to do things, but they won't actually submit to what God asks them to do. So maybe you're a person, you find yourself praying all the time, God, would you do this? God, would you do this? But if God were to ask you to do something, you probably would just ignore it and keep asking God to do things for you. Maybe you find yourself talking in a way that other Christians will respect you. So you talk about Christian things, you talk about this, but maybe you're not living it on the side because you're using God to run away from God. I'm going to focus on these things over here. They're easy, so I don't have to deal with the harder things, if that makes sense. Maybe you're running away from your weaknesses or your failures because you're using God to avoid actually dealing with God in a real way. So maybe that's you, maybe that's not. That's the first one. Number 2, ignoring negative emotions like anger, fear, and sadness. So a person who's ignoring their negative emotions because they think God doesn't want them to feel this way. So there's verses that say, do not fear, don't give in to your anger, don't let it take root in your heart. And we feel like we have to push those negative emotions down and ignore them, pretend like they're not there because, Jesus is supposed to make us happy. Following God is supposed to be so great all the time. And so we find ourselves running away from those hard ones. But that's not healthy, and that's not the life God wants for you. So that's number 2. Number 3, living a double life. Maybe you find yourself being a different person at church or with church people than you do when you're with your school friends or with non-church people, maybe even at home. And if you're doing that, that's a sign that things are out of balance in your life and in your relationship with God. That one's pretty straightforward. And that one, I feel like when I was in high school, I would lean towards that one. But actually, when I was in middle school, I'd say I was more of a double life person. I'd be one person at school, and I'd be another person at church. And that's not healthy. That's not good. Number 4, doing things for God instead of being with God. Ooh, some of you just got punched in the gut. You perfect church Christian kids, you kids who do everything right. You do things for God instead of being with God. These people maybe seem to be the perfect Christian. They're doing everything right. They're helping out in 1,000 different areas at church. But it's been a while since you were just alone with God. It's been a while since you were just with Him. And I identify with this one as a pastor. I identify with this one as someone my job is to do things for God and to do things for you guys for God. And it's an easy habit to fall into because I want to be a good pastor. I want to be an effective pastor, so I find myself doing all these things for God. And there's a danger in that because your faith can become all about doing and not enough about being with God. And it's important to be with God. That's what our faith is about. That's actually the key factor. You know, there's a verse in the New Testament in one of the Gospels where Jesus says, not everyone who says, Lord, Lord, will enter my kingdom. You know, people are going to stand in front of God and they're going to say, God, I did this, I did this, I did this. I deserve to enter into the kingdom of heaven. And he's going to say, get away from me, for I never knew you. Because it's not about doing things for God. It's about being with God and knowing God. And so that's an unhealthy way to live, just to be obsessed with doing, but not actually being with God. Number 5, covering up brokenness, weakness, or failure. You know, there can be a lot of pressure to have it all together in the church world. There can be a lot of pressure to have all the answers. And sometimes we can try to cover up the brokenness. Sometimes we can try to, even from ourselves, like maybe you're covering up brokenness to other people, but maybe you're lying to yourself about the brokenness. And that's not healthy for you, and that's not healthy for what God wants in your life. You don't have to have it all figured out. You don't have to be perfect, and you don't need to hide from yourself or from other people the brokenness that's inside of you. And number 6, and when I was a teenager, this one was my biggest one, I would say. Judging other people's spiritual journey. You know, you look at people and you're like, wow, that person is just terrible. That person, oh wow, they're going to hell for sure. That person, you know, they're screwing up their life with that decision. They're screwing up their life with that decision. They're a terrible person. They're a monster. They're not a good Christian. They're doing this wrong. They're doing this wrong. It is so easy to get caught up criticizing and judging other people, even without even realizing that you're doing it, right? You do this without realizing it a lot of the time. And when you're doing that, when you're judging other people instead of, you know, looking internally at yourself, you're probably making a lot of other mistakes with that. You're probably blind to all the other mistakes that you could be making, right? Because you're spending all your time looking at other people and not yourself. And these are all things that stand in between us and God. And there's just a story I want to read really quickly from the book of Mark about what Jesus did when he saw a lot of unhealthy things happening in his temple when he came to Jerusalem. This is Mark chapter 11, verses 15 through 17. When he reached Jerusalem, Jesus entered the temple courts and began driving out those who were buying and selling there. He overturned the tables of the money changers and the benches of those selling doves, and he wouldn't allow anyone to carry merchandise through the temple courts. As he taught them, he said, "Is it not written, my house will be called the house of prayer for all nations? But you have made it into a den of robbers." So Jesus, he comes into the house of God, and there's all this stuff there that shouldn't be there. There's all these things that are happening that shouldn't be there. And he flips tables and he chases out, you know, people who he calls thieves, but they're merchants. They're trying to do what's best for them. And they've stopped thinking about what God wants. And he chases all these people out of the temple. He chases all these animals out of the temple so that it can become the place that it needs to be. And kind of the question that I want you guys to ask yourself this week as we're going into the rest of this week is, if Jesus were to walk into your life today the way he walked into the temple, what tables would he start flipping? If he were to clean you out, if he were to make things right today in your heart, in your life, what tables would he start flipping? You know, would it be that you're using God to run away from God? Maybe that you're focused on the easy parts of Christian spirituality and you've been running away and ignoring the hard parts. Maybe you've been ignoring negative feelings and it's been causing some problems and Jesus needs to come in and deal with it. Maybe you've been living a double life. Maybe you've been doing things for God instead of being with God. Maybe you've been covering up brokenness, weakness, or failure because you feel like you have to have it all together. Maybe you've been spending so much time judging other people's spirituality that you haven't been focused enough on your own. And I just want to give you some time today to focus on these things that are preventing you from experiencing God the way you need to. You need to find time, 2 minutes. Just sit down and say, God, would you come into my mind and start flipping some tables? would you come into my heart and start flipping some tables? In your own words. It doesn't have to be eloquent. It doesn't have to be well thought out or well worded. Just sit down and be honest. God, there is crap in my heart that I need you to deal with. I want to be with you. I don't want to be distracted by this. I don't want to be distracted by this. And then you pray, you speak to God, and then you sit for a couple minutes and you just give him a chance to speak to you in silence, and just you close your eyes and you just listen, waiting to hear God's voice. So I'm going to pray with you, and then we're going to end things today. But I want you to continue this. Find 5 minutes to go pray. That's it. That's all I'm asking. 5 minutes with God. So you guys can bow your heads, close your eyes, go off and pray. Go spend some time with God. Father, would you do a work in me? The same work that I'm asking of these students. Father, I fall into the patterns that we're talking about today. I fall into the pattern of putting my entire relationship with you into the work that I'm doing for my students. But Father, as I seek you today, as I chase after you today, would I find you and connect with you separate from the ministry that I do? And Father, any other things in my heart that I'm not aware of, any other problems in my heart and the hearts of our students that are watching, would you come in and would you start cleaning us out? Would you start making things right so that we can be the people you've called us to be? Would you start to lead us to a healthy relationship with you? In your name, amen. Hope you guys are doing well. I will see you tomorrow.